Hi everybody, Stefan Molyneux from Freedom Main Radio. Hope you're doing well. So why, oh why, did feminism take such a big leap forward in the post-Second World War period, particularly in the 60s and further from there? Well, of course, there was the invention and mass consumption of labor-saving devices, which meant that women could be freed from doing machine-like chattel work of cleaning and cooking and all of that kind of stuff. So, yeah, and fridges and washing machines and so on that helped significantly to liberate labor from the home. But I think that there's a much more important aspect or issue that is going on. Because remember, feminism was to a large degree funded either directly by the state or indirectly through the state protection of feminist academics. So one thing that's really important to understand why the free market is so essential for the continual progress of mankind is that the creative destruction of the free market is essential. A company that sells a treatment is not financially invested in finding a cure. And a company that sells a cure is not financially incentivized to find prevention. This is very, very important to understand. The people who sell you cold remedies are not actively, likely, trying to find a cure, that one pill and you can take your cold is gone in an hour. Not because they're bad guys, not because they don't care about people, but basic of economics, people respond to incentives. And this is really, really important. If you don't have the creative destruction of the free market, then companies entrench themselves in solving problems that they have no financial incentive to prevent from occurring. Really, really important. The people who sell you chemotherapy or radiation treatment for cancer are not as incentivized to prevent you from getting cancer in the first place. Doesn't mean that they're evil people. Again, I want to really be clear on this. Doesn't mean they're evil people profiting off illness and so on. It's just natural. If you're making $1 billion selling a particular kind of treatment, then if you find a cure, yes, you can sell money for sure, but you're immediately dropping $1 billion a year of income. If you can find prevention, that's always cheaper, right? Prevention is always cheaper, almost always cheaper than cure, and so you'll make less money preventing, or maybe even no money preventing, than you will out of curing or treating. And so this is why you need as free a market as possible, because companies grow providing a kind of solution, and then they don't have an incentive to prevent the problem that they're solving from occurring. So this is particularly heinous when the, quote, solution for social problems is placed in the hands of the state, because the hands of the state, or the fists of the state, prevent the creative destruction of people coming along and saying, wait a second here. Instead of giving money to poor people, how can we prevent poverty? How can we possibly make education, which is an overhead in society, more efficient than 12 plus years of 6 or 8 hours a day of locking kids in these brain-deadening rows of choo-choo trains over the cliff of propaganda to the state called nowhere? Is there any way that we can make things more efficient? Is there any way that we can cure rather than treat? Is there any way that we can prevent rather than cure? Well, you could, I think, take the perspective, and I think it's a reasonable one to take, that in some ways, for certain people in society, the post-Second World War period was kind of like a golden age within the family. Now, I know there's Leave It to Beaver, and I read a book when I was in grad school called Homeward Bound about some of the stultifications of the suburbs. But overall, relative to the periods that came before it, relative to the First World War, relative to the chaotic 20s, relative to the depressed 30s, and relative to the war of the 1940s, it kind of was not a bad time in the, in North America at least, to be a kid and to be, you had usually the dad going off to work and the mom stayed home with the children, and in a pretty comfortable and secure environment. The wages were going up. Yes, there was the Cold War and so on, so I'm not trying to diminish any of that, but relative to what had come before, it was a pretty decent and peaceful time. And again, the mother-child bond, which is the foundation of freedom in society, the mother-child bond was very strong in the post-war period. From that strength, from the strength of that bond, came the radicalization of the 60s. And that's really, really important. Now, I know that the 60s, there's a lot of hedonism, there was some drug use and so on. But there was concern for blacks. There was concern for minorities. There was a skepticism towards the existing hierarchy. There was an anti-war movement. Yes, it took 7 or 8 years to get moving, but it really had a lot of power in the late 60s. And so if you're in charge, right, and you get that the stronger the mother-child bond, the greater the chance of rebellion from adults, then what you need to do is you need to break the mother-child bond. You need to break the mother-child bond. Now, you can't do it by just stealing children from moms. It's too obvious. It's like SOPA. It's too obvious. So it has to be more subtle. The stronger the mother-child bond, and by mother I just mean primary caregiver, but you know, mostly it's the mom. The stronger the mother-child bond, the less susceptible the child is to a brutal hierarchy, the more skeptical the child is to political authority, political power. Because, you know, if the child is loved by the mom, then authority figures are voluntary, benevolent, and kind and helpful and so on. And then you run into the state and it's the complete opposite, and you're like, well, this is bullshit. This is nothing like the authority I had growing up, or not much like it. So the government, political leadership, is always at odds with the parent-child bond. Whenever you want to radically change society, I mean for the worst, then you have to attack the mother-child bond. I mean, the separation of children from parents has been a key characteristic of totalitarianism from day one. I mean, it's the reason why Jesus said, I have come to set parent against child and parent against parent and hamsters against weevils and so on. So how do you separate the mothers from the children so that the children grow up more susceptible to political authority? Well, it's very cunning. What you do is you fund radical feminism. And radical feminists then go out and say that you are chattel at home, that serving your children and helping your husband is some sort of bondage or semi-enslavement. But to be really free, to be genuinely, gloriously free, you have to go out and become a wage slave. Because you see, obeying a boss is freedom, but helping out your family is slavery. And that's what you have to do. You have to recharacterize all of the existing family structure as some sort of bondage. And then a lot of women will then say, well, I want to go out and I want to get a job and I want to go out on my feet. Now, what this is great for the state on many, many levels. First of all, of course, it converts non-taxable labor into taxable labor on 2 levels. The first, of course, is that women who used to be doing work from home now go out into the workforce where they can be taxed. So it's a massive increase in income for the state. The second thing it does is it creates the need for a massive cadre of professional, semi-professional, amateur, unskilled, you name it, childcare providers. And that can also be taxed, right? So you get the mom to go to work, the mom now pays taxes on the salary or whatever she's making, plus then they have to get a nanny in or send their kid to a daycare, and all of that labor can be taxed as well. So it's a massive increase in state power, state income, and this is one of the reasons why, from the 1960s on, you see national debts accelerating. Because the government now has a massive additional increase in income, which it then uses as collateral to go out and borrow more. I mean, you know, if you have a farmer who's collecting 1,000 eggs a day, and suddenly he can collect 1,500 eggs a day, that makes the farm bigger, not smaller, right? It's not like he then cuts back by 75% or whatever, so that he ends up with more or less the same. No, not at all. So when you give more money to the state uses it to borrow more, get bigger, and this is where this, you know, massive, crazy-ass extrapolation of growth comes from. And this is the great tragedy, of course, of what has happened to women over the past 40, 50 years. It's wretched, wretched, horrible beyond words. Which is that, you know, they got lured by the siren song of radical feminism out into the workforce, they abandoned their kids, they, you know, maybe divorced their husbands, and then what's happened now is that it's become a one-way street, right? Because women have found that it's not really that much fun to be out there being a wage slave compared to, you know, cuddling and playing with your children all day, which is sort of what I do. It's not that much fun, but now they can't go back, right? They went out this door and they found out that it locked from the inside, no lock on the outside, can't get back in. Why? Because taxes have gone up so much that where one person, usually the man, was able to support a household, now it takes two. And so the children have been taken from the mother, and the mother has been turned from a nurturer of her children to tax livestock for her political masters. And that is one of the worst bargains in history that could conceivably be imagined. It's just unbelievably wretched. And it's not irreversible. I mean, you just need to stop spending so much money, people. Stop borrowing so much money. And if you have to live in a tent to take care of your kids, take care of your kids. That's a terrible insult. Think about it. Oh, wretched, wretched. It's a terrible insult to children to say, I'm going to get you a nanny. I'm going to put you in daycare. Which is to say that parenting is such an unimportant task that you can farm it out for about $5 an hour or $8 an hour. And that's, pretty much the same as you being at home, or maybe even better. Imagine that. Imagine that. Imagine you want to get to know some woman, and you go out on 2 dates. Things seem to be going pretty well. She may be a little skeptical, but, she's agreed to a third date. And then you have to work late, and so you phone up, just some stranger and say, listen, I'm going to pay you $15 to go and have dinner with this woman. And then this guy shows up. She doesn't know him, but he is the kind of guy who's willing to accept $15 and a free meal to go eat with someone. And you're going to consider that the equivalent of you being on that date? Of course not. It's an insult to your children to say some stranger for $5 or $8 or $10 or $20 an hour can come and be the caregiver for you instead of me. What an unbelievable devaluing of parenting and of your children's needs and wants. And I say this hopefully with a shred or two of credibility. I worked in a daycare for years. I was an assistant teacher, so I know a little bit about what goes on at these places. And it was a good daycare, all things considered, relative to others. And I've also been a stay-at-home dad now for 3 years. So I really do know at a very tangible and deep level the degree to which children need their parents, not food and shelter and spit-covered toys, biohazards that they are. They need their parents. I mean, the intimacy, the knowing what your child likes, what the rhythms are, knowing what particular facial expressions mean, knowing when they're getting tired but won't say it, knowing you get the inside jokes that sort of make sense with each other, knowing what your children's favorite characters sound like and how to make those funny voices. Whatever it is that is going on, there's a huge and massive and deep degree of intimacy that goes on between parent and child. It's not possible to replicate in other situations. It's just not possible. Now, I've had some questions about the economics of what I've been talking about. So I'm sort of saying that if women have kids, there's just no way to maintain a salary level equal to those women who don't have kids. And since most women do have kids, we'll just talk about it in the traditional women and men bit. The deal is generally this. The deal is that you give up a lot of time and resources to have kids when you're young, and then when you get old, your kids will take care of you, right? That is the age-old deal that's been going on since the beginning of time. And to say that somehow women who have kids should be compensated equal to those who don't, or to men, is crazy. It's wrong. I mean, it's unfair, it's unjust. Because if I didn't have kids or didn't have a wife or whatever, then I would need to set aside a fair amount of money when I'm older to pay for nurses, to pay for people to drive me around to hospitals when I get old and grizzly and sick. And I would need to pay for a nursing home or some place to stay. And of course, that whole goal, of course, is you raise your children lovingly and happily enough that they want to take care of you when you get old. And so you spend a lot of money when they're young, but you save a lot of money when you get old. That's the deal. It doesn't always work out, and it's nothing you can impose upon your children because they didn't choose to be your children, but you did choose to have children. So you can't impose it. It should be something that is offered freely and out of love from your children when they get older. But I think that's the deal, right? So people, you spend a lot of money when your kids are young, but you save a lot of money when they get older. And that's not the case if you're single. So I mean, it's not fair. I mean, of course, there's going to be a hit in income if you have kids. That's, that's the way it is. I mean, sort of if you were interested in marrying me, and I said, well, it's about 95% chance that, we can get married, but I'll be gone for probably a couple of years at some point in our marriage. I may come back, I may not, I don't know. And I'm going to be much less available for about 20 years after I take that trip. Well, relative to somebody who says, I'm going to be there, and I'm not going to go, and I'm not going to go walk about, and I'm going to be available, well, that's just the reality. You would be less desirable as a mate. And, when I was a manager, there were women who had kids, and they had to leave at 5. And then there were, the young guys and some of the women who didn't have kids, they could stay late if they had to. And, it didn't make a difference in terms of the way that you approach hiring or anything like that. But there is a sort of basic reality. They've got to go pick up their kids. And they take more sick days because they've got themselves getting sick, or their kids getting sick, or their kids bringing something god-awful and unholy home from the daycare. So that's just natural. There's no way around that. It's not a problem. It's just a reality that women get pregnant and they give birth, and hopefully they will breastfeed, and they tend to be the primary caregivers when children are young. There's really not much you can do about that unless you choose not to have kids at all. So yeah, I think that recognizing that the state has an incentive to take the kids out of the orbit of the parents. I mean, as I said, it gives them more tax money, but also, of course, it gives the states the opportunity to propagandize the kids when they're very young, right? The kids want to get their hands on the young earlier and earlier because, kids who have a great and strong maternal bond, tend to be pretty skeptical of abusive authority, i.e. the state or other forms of authority. And so, like, I was at the library, and I was playing with some kids. His 3-year-old kids, jumped up when someone was humming, "Oh, Canada," and they stood stiffly to attention. One of them even saluted. I mean, that's what they're getting in the daycares. They're singing the national anthem, and they're being trained into good little, I'm trying to think of the right phrase that's not too Soviet. Good little comrades of the social order. And so it really is massively beneficial. You can see the same thing happening with poverty, right? So poverty was being reduced by about 1% per year in the post-war period. And the government then realized that if children are not mistreated, there's much less need for the state. Much less need for the state if children are not mistreated. Because if children aren't mistreated, there are far fewer criminals, far fewer people with a thirst for power, far fewer drug addicts, far fewer people with health problems, far fewer poor people, because income is strongly inversely correlated to child abuse in many ways. And so if children are well treated, then the need for the state diminishes, and the state does not want to support the diminishment of the need for its, quote, services. I mean, that's natural. I mean, it's inevitable. I mean, you can't, even in the free market, companies don't want to do that. When they have a monopoly on power called the state, they're even less likely to do it. And so when the problem of poverty was being solved, the government intervened. The government created the welfare state, which then stopped people from escaping from poverty. And you can see the line just flattens out. And if you include things like the national debt, lower qualities of education, it's getting even worse for the poor, and it's going to get even worse for the poor. So the government wants to close the doors of people leaving the need for the state, the dependence on the state. How can you get votes from people? How can you get donations from people if they're not dependent on you, if they don't want something from you? And people who are raised in a healthy, peaceful, loving, and productive manner, they don't need the state. Society as a whole doesn't need the state if children are raised well. So separating children from their parents, traumatizing them through that way, propagandizing them, creating environments which are destructive towards children, like the welfare state, like terrible public schools. I mean, traumatizing for children, because you get this Lord of the Flies situation. And so to continually separate children from loving mothers, to continue to traumatize them, that is the essence of the state. And tragically, and I have no idea whether this is part of the plan or not, and again, I don't think there's any big evil plan, it's just the way that, you don't have to sort of say that lions are involved in some sort of conspiracy if they gather together in a pack to hunt an antelope. That's just what they do. There's an instinctual way that human beings dominate others because it's so profitable and productive to do so for the evil among us. So I don't know if it was part of the plan or not, but one of the great tragedies of radical feminism, or the sort of go to work rather than raise your kids feminism, is that it has just resulted in the worst bargain for women. I think women are beginning to sort of wake up to this and recognize that this is why there's much less pro-feminism in the way that, again, I don't mean feminism like women shouldn't be equal to men. Of course they should. But very few people, much fewer people now identify themselves, much fewer women now identify themselves as feminists, largely because there's just been this terrible bargain. And, you know, nobody ever gets older and says, geez, I wish I'd spent a little bit more time at work. It's all about the personal relationships, and that's really what we should get back to focusing on. Best way to fight the power of the state, to fight the power of unjust religiosity, to fight the power of any brutal hierarchy is to stay home and love the living heck out of your kids. That is how we become free.